chip in, okay? So my name's Preist. I am a computer scientist, mathematician originally. I would say I'm kind of uncomfortable about just being that. I've been told I'm transdisciplinary. I'm not entirely sure what that means, but apparently I'm kind of that, and I imagine some of you in this room are as well. And one of the, I'm here, I'm very grateful for the invitation, but I will say I'm also here because I would be very much like to speak with people who are interested in expanding the scope of what I'm doing. I'm interested in engaging with people from different disciplines to think about how we can expand the scope of what I'm doing, possibly putting in joint research proposals, etc. So if it's something that is interest to you and you think you can have a perspective that's different from mine that will complement it, then let's have a conversation later on, okay? Thank you. So basically what I'm going to do is give you a kind of a whistle-stop tour of the issues with regard to primarily energy use, but not exclusively energy use, and therefore climate emissions associated with digital technology. And is digital technology a climate change or environmental saint or sinner? That's the question we're going to be looking at. And I'm going to focus mostly on the sinner side, because that's where my work focuses, but I'm also going to say a little bit about the saint side and what the companies say, and my views on that. So that's what we're going to be doing. So that's where we are. So this is my research team. Dan Sheen was my first PhD student. He now is an academic. I joined academia 8 years ago. Before that, I was a researcher in a number of things, particularly artificial intelligence at Hewlett-Packard Research Labs in Bristol. I was made redundant 8 years ago. Towards the end of my time at Hewlett-Packard Research Labs, I was the representative globally for the research community on Hewlett-Packard's Sustainability Strategy Board, the one that decided Hewlett-Packard's corporate sustainability strategy. I was the voice of the research community on that. So I was passionate, I've always been passionate about sustainability, right back from Dr. Seuss's lifting of the Lorax age 7 or whatever. So it's always been a passion for me, and when I got made redundant, there was the opportunity to join Bristol University to focus it more fully in my career, so that's what I did. And so this is the rest of my team: Dan Sheen, Paul Shabji. A lot of the work we're going to be presenting here, Paul's done a lot of the work that he's my research fellow, and he works very closely on this. Chris Weeks, who has been working with EDF, and Maria Mora, who is at the Carbon Disclosure Project, doing work together with them, with us. So what is our research? We're interested in digital systems. Digital systems, that's a digital system. The internet is a digital system. Your mobile phone is a digital system. These are all parts of digital systems. And we're interested in the design of digital systems and how these interact with sustainability challenges, particularly climate change and energy use, but not exclusively, and human behavior. Those are the three things that we kind of are interested in, how we bring these things together, because the design of a digital system affects human behavior, and human behavior of the digital system results in emissions, results in environmental impact. So that's what we're interested in. So the two main research questions we have is, what is the direct impact of digital services? In other words, what's the direct environmental impact of using digital services? And how does the interaction of the design of these digital services and our behavior affect the direct impact? So in other words, how can you design digital services to change their impact, hopefully for a positive way? How can digital services, that's the first question, which we'll mostly look at today. That's the main focus today. The second that we work on, which I'm focusing less on today, is how can digital services engage people in response to sustainability challenges, maybe to change their behavior in a positive way. That's something that we also do work on, but not the subject of today's talk. So here's some of the people we either are working with or have worked with: The Guardian, BBC, Sustain, EDF, the Environment Agency, CDP. These are people that we work with fairly closely to try to solve some of their problems and draw inspiration to our work. So now to the meat of what we're doing. So first of all, what do we mean by the direct environmental impacts of digital technology? Broadly, and this will be very familiar to many of you, anyone who has used life cycle thinking, which will be most people in this room, the environmental impacts of digital technology break down into three aspects. First of all, you need to make the stuff. And making the stuff involves mining raw materials, particularly rare earth metals. That's not the biggest, it's not necessarily the largest part of this, but it's possibly the most impactful part of this. Digging up rare earth metals, turning them into products. Then we use the products. So energy is used during the manufacture, of course. And then we use the products, and the use phase for digital technology is significant. There's a fair amount of energy during the use phase, and that's what we're mainly looking at today. And finally, we dispose of them. Hopefully, we dispose of them in nice, shiny, WEEE-compliant facilities, or they might end up in Ghana. So these are some of the issues that one needs to deal with digital technology. So as I say, today my main focus is going to be on this, the energy use during the use phase. So what's the big picture? So there's some work by Malmedin et al. They estimated the usage in 2007, and they used basically sales, market, official stats, and device power use data. And they estimated that it was about 710 terawatt hours of electricity use, which is about 4% of the world's electricity usage at that time. And it's likely to have increased. And they provide a breakdown between what's data centers, what's the internet, what's the access network going on, which we'll talk more about later on. If you think about the size of this overall, so that's 4%. If you throw, that's 4% of electricity use. If you throw in also entertainment devices, consumer entertainment devices, which means television sets, it bumps this up a bit. And it becomes about, if you look at it from a climate change emissions perspective, it becomes about 4% of global emissions if you take into account entertainment. And that means that is roughly comparable to aviation in terms of size. So the ICT, emissions associated with our use of ICT, primarily entertainment, is roughly comparable with aviation. And that was something that kind of came up. And that came up partly in the ICT industry because they thought, hang on, the aviation industry is getting a lot of stick. Is it going to happen to us? What should we do about this? That was something that came up when I was at Hewlett-Packard in the sustainability task force, effectively. That's one of the things we had to think about. So how do we mitigate these impacts? So the IT industry, I will say, is generally quite a progressive industry, broadly. There's certain things that they're not that progressive on, but in general, from a climate change perspective, they're pretty progressive. And so they're interested in doing what they can, and within the limitations, of course, of the capitalist system that they are embedded in. And so these are things that are already in existence. These are things that when I was at Hewlett-Packard, I saw rolling out from, I would say, the early 90s onwards. Design for environment was rolled out in the early 90s. That's really trying to, a number of factors, but particularly trying to reduce the energy use of individual devices, reduce the energy use of a laptop that you're designing, trying to take that into account during the design phase. Green IT, data centers, trying to design data centers so that they're more energy efficient. Google is a leader in that. Google has done great work in designing data centers so that they don't need to be cooled as much, so they can run more efficiently, because traditionally data centers, half the energy, this is if you go back maybe 10 years ago, half the energy was used on doing stuff, and the other half was used on trying to keep the equipment cool so it could carry on doing stuff and not break down. But nowadays, only about 10% of the energy is now used on cooling. So Google, and a lot of that has come out of Google, who share their technology quite widely. They basically, when they made innovations, they said, this is what we're doing. Why don't you try it as well? Not just Google, others as well, but there was a number of companies that did that quite effectively. And so data centers are far more energy efficient than they used to be. And then the third part, partly in response to the WEEE directive, the European WEEE directive, product take-back and reuse recycling is another area where companies have done a fair amount of work at trying to move towards improving that. But broadly, what they're trying to do is make each component of the system more efficient, and make each component of the system less impactful from an environmental point of view. What my research team brings is we believe that you need to understand the system as a whole, and also the role of the individual in that system as an individual, as opposed to a kind of well-defined average person who behaves like an average person. We find that if we look at the distribution of people, from teenage high-end gamers to a retired person who is viewing video over Sky, then their impacts are quite different, and what one needs to do in response to those are quite different, and therefore we need to think more about the diversity of approaches as opposed to an average person. So how can we understand more about the person in the loop? How do people actually use these products, and what effect does this have? Not just the product, but on the whole system. These products are supported by a lot of things nowadays. It used to be you just use a computer, it was a computer. Nowadays a computer is a window on the World Wide Web. And so when you use this, you're accessing services, information, etc. across the web. When you use this, you are having an energy impact in Ireland, in California, in India through the use of this. Okay, so it's not simply a kind of local in my house thing. It's a holistic thing. Okay, so our contributions, what we have done, my research team, a more detailed and quantified understanding of the end-to-end impact of digital services. In other words, what does the digital service, when YouTube, for example, or Netflix, what is the end-to-end impact of a service like this? How does its energy get used in different parts of the system? Understand how the user behavior and design decisions affect this. So the end-to-end impact of the services is determined in the end by what the users are doing. It's not determined by just the design of the system. And the design of the system will affect what users do. And finally, we have developed basically a kind of design for environment rubric to help people think about perspective of the whole system perspective. So when someone's thinking about digital service, how can they design that digital service with design for environment characteristics embedded in it? So the first project we did, which was called SYMPACT, and now our tool system is called SYMPACT. It was mainly with The Guardian, and I'll show you the results of that in a moment. We have a toolkit which allows us effectively using life cycle analysis-like techniques to rapidly put together end-to-end assessments of digital services. If someone said, right, I come to you with this digital service, this is what it looks like, then we can put together a model of it fairly rapidly using both primary data and our library of secondary data and say, this is what we think the energy use and therefore the climate change emissions connected with that service will be. What's the overall impact of a service? Standard LCA questions. What's the overall impact of a service and where are the hotspots? Where do we need to focus our research to reduce it? And how much, this is a key question for us. The service model, the LCA, is to a certain extent a reflection of the design of that system. And how might alternate designs, how could we design that system differently to have different impacts? That's the question that we help organisations answer. And also, how might, so that's one question, that's to do with the design now, but also the thing about these services is these services change customer behaviour. When The Guardian released its website, that changed customers' behaviour. When The Guardian released its e-tablet offering, that changed customers' behaviour. So how is customer behaviour changing over time? And how might technology advances change it? So we know that data centres are becoming more efficient. So if we use data for today, it won't be valid in 10 years' time. We need to think about the projections. So what might the footprint be in 20 years of this technology? So we're trying to think not just about now, but scenarios in the future. And we can explore alternative scenarios under different characteristics. So that's what we're doing. So this is kind of the techie summary of the characteristics of our model. I'll go through it briefly. Not necessarily the most interesting, but nonetheless important if one wants to get into the detail. So we have a very highly detailed model with uncertainty very clearly modelled in it, the level of uncertainty. So it allows us to basically, what's key about this is that we have a model which allows, rather than saying an average person, it allows a model of the diversity of behaviours within the system. And I won't go into detail, but when we talk about the BBC, we use viewing data, very detailed viewing data surveys, which says a certain number of people behave like this, a certain number of people behave like this, a certain number of people behave like this. So we don't take an average BBC viewer, we take the genuine distribution of BBC viewers, which allows us to say this genuinely is very close to what we believe the impact of BBC viewing is, which I'll share with you later on. We have a rich data set of primary data connected with our particular customers and also with online sources such as Energy Star, which is a database. Energy Star is a US-led initiative to make technology more efficient, and they publish for any Energy Star compliant computer, you will know its energy use, and so we can download that to use that in our models. And we integrate basically with analytics systems. So the Guardian, for the first people we work with The Guardian, we have analytics which tells us what their users are doing at any given time. And so that means we can incorporate actual user behaviors from analytics. So the same way that Google knows what you're up to, The Guardian also knows what you're up to some extent. Anyone and any of you who are a website designer, you know what people who come to your website are up to. You have the stats. And so we can use that as genuine data about behavior to tell us what the impact of people who are using that is. Visual dashboards can be used in real time, so we haven't deployed that, but in theory with The Guardian we could quite easily deploy it with a live feed from their user analytics data to say, therefore we can tell you right at this moment, this is your carbon footprint for the next hour, that kind of thing. And what if analysis, so that's right now, and the what if analysis is let's think about 20 years rather than think about the next hour. Let's think about 20 years. How might technology change? How might user behavior change? And based on these changes under these future scenarios, what would our predictions be for energy use? Okay, so now when I went on my training course to become a lecturer at Bristol University 8 years ago, I was told I need to engage the audience somehow, so I'm now going to engage you by asking you a question, okay? So here's a question for you. You probably won't know the answer, but you're going to guess, okay? So don't feel you have to know. So which do you think? So we will have 1 hour of a HD video service, a high-definition video service, being streamed to a laptop. So Netflix would be an example of that. So 1 hour of Netflix or BBC iPlayer if you choose the HD option. So these are, so 1 hour, what's the rough energy footprint of 1 hour? I'm not going to ask you what's the rough energy footprint, but what I want you to do is guess which part of the system uses most energy, okay? That's what I'm going to ask you. Do you think it is the data centers? Or do you think it is the network? Or do you think it is the laptop? That's the question, okay? So have a think, briefly. That's enough thinking. So now I'm going to ask you to vote. I'm going to ask you to vote. And I did this to an audience of 200 odd television engineers at BBC Broadcasting House. Okay, so just be aware that you're in good company here when you do this. Okay, so who thinks it's the data centers? Hands up for the data centers. 1, 2, right? A smattering of votes for the data centers. Let's see. Who thinks it's the network? Oh, quite a few votes for the network. And who thinks it's the laptop? Do you know, it's kind of even. I think that the network won. I think the network won there, just the network won, which is interesting because that is the right answer. And I will say that when we first did this, so there's more awareness about energy use in the network. When we first did this, which was quite a while back with the BBC, when we did the Guardian work, we did it with the BBC, must be 5 or 6 years ago, and even the network technologists weren't voting for the network. Okay, we had, I think, 6 votes for the network. Okay, so the awareness of the network intensity is changing. Everyone at that time was convinced that data centers were the big issue at that time, and now people are aware that they're not the only issue. So a laptop has a power of about 15 watts, and a mobile phone has a power of about 1 watt. This is the so 15 watts here is that blue band there. That's the laptop. Okay, this is the core network. There, that bit there is the core network, and that is the home Wi-Fi on that. So that is, if you're doing, this is for based on public domain available information about Netflix. This is what we're using, okay? So that is the, for the home. If you do it via mobile, then this is what it is. It's less, you see, it's less, it's gone down, but this is the mobile network here. But you'll see the core network has gone down quite a lot. And why is that? And the reason is because if you're using Netflix over mobile, they use effectively a throttle of the quality. It's a more compressed signal because you don't need such a good signal, and also they don't want to use lots of bandwidth. And if you decide you put it on high definition, sorry, not high definition, but higher quality, because you're getting too many glitches, then this is what it looks like. You see now, suddenly, on your mobile device, which is quite a small thing compared with a laptop, its footprint is dwarfing that of that of viewing it on the laptop. And just so you get some figures, that's 150 watts. So 150 watts is there. So that means since a small laptop is about 15 watts, that means 10 times the energy use is actually in the network from your laptop.
So is that SD or is that also HD?
This is all HD. This is all HD. Yeah, this is all HD. Yeah. So this is all HD, but here what they do is, so you know how when you have a digital signal you get glitches? If you're streaming it in live time, you get glitches at times. So basically the more compressed it is, the more likely you are to have glitches. And so what they do is these things, they throttle it down a bit and they use more compression.
So why is it that sorry, I missed it.
So
why is that the mobile device so high compared to that?
So the reason is because this is the mobile network. This orange here is the mobile network. This is data transfer. So the reason is because the mobile network is quite energy intensive with regard to delivering data to you compared with the core network. The core network is used very efficiently. There's huge, great servers which sit kind of in data centers that pump large amounts of data and everyone's using it, whereas a mobile network is serving a relatively small number of people. Yeah, so that's what's going on there. Okay, so let's carry on. Thank you for doing that. So this is the digital infrastructure. We've got our end user devices. We've got stuff in the home, like your local modems, you know, the boxes that plug into the wall. We've got our 3G, 4G, 5G now base stations. We've got the core network and the end network, things that people like Virgin Media will be dealing with. This is what they do. We've got stuff around the town. Again, this is Virgin Media. This is more detail of that. And then we have the final data centres, which isn't on in this picture, but that's broadly what the system looks like. The data centre situation is more complicated because in the old days, The Guardian would only have one data centre in London. Nowadays, they rent space all around the world, which does what are called content delivery networks, which caches information so that people in different parts of the world get a better service. So information spreads out from a home data centre across the world to various places, complicating the system. So that's what it looks like. So now let's look at The Guardian's footprint. So we were able to help The Guardian to be the first organisation to footprint its digital services from an end-to-end and report on it in its corporate report. And this is part of the report. You will see here we have the printing. There we are, that's printing. We have the offices and travel here, and their home data centre, which is mainly looking after their staff, not actually doing, not running the website. And then this is the footprint of the digital product. You'll see the footprint of the digital product is quite small compared with the footprint of the paper product. And these are some examples. I won't go into the detail here, but these are some examples that, again, were in the Guardian Sustainability Report, giving details about different scenarios that we could give estimates for. So this was, and one of the reasons to say about why the Guardian is relatively small, this part is relatively small, is because a website does not use a large amount of data because it doesn't have a lot of audio or video. As they start using more video, that digital part will get bigger over time, okay? Which is why our interest turned to video, because we're aware that video would be something that would be more impactful. And so this is a model of YouTube. So this is not done using data from Google, private data from Google. This is done using purely publicly available data, plus some guesses on our part about what might be going on behind the scenes. So we got a model of YouTube. That's what it looks like in our model. And it allows us to knock up a quick model. And I'm not going to give you the full figures because we plan to publish this and we want to be completely confident about the figures we release before we go public. So we're checking and double checking. But what I am going to do is show you the pattern. So there's no scale here. I'm not going to tell you how many gigawatt hours of energy it uses. This is from January 2015 to January 2016. And YouTube is mostly viewed on laptops, as we saw earlier. But if you look, you'll see this is the cellular network. And again, the cellular network dominates emissions for YouTube, even though most viewing of YouTube is not done on the cellular network. The small percentage, small to medium percentage that's done over cellular networks dominates overall. And it's interesting when you think about Google's strategy. Google, as I said before, from an environmental point of view, is a progressive organisation, a very committed organisation from an environmental perspective. We can criticise them for other things, but from an environmental point of view, they're pretty progressive. And so they have invested seriously in energy efficiency in their data centres and also seriously in renewable energy, harnessing renewable energy. But if we look at where that helps them, for YouTube, that only helps here. This is their data center footprint. So it's non-trivial, it's worth doing. But if you see it's quite small compared with the overall footprint, if you look at the digital service overall, you see that a lot of the emissions are outside the data center. So for Google Search, it makes complete sense, because for Google Search, it will look quite different. Google Search, interaction with Google Search doesn't send a lot of data along, it's just sending words along the network. And so most of the work for Google Search is in Google's data centers. And so if this diagram was done for Google Search, it would look quite different. And their environmental strategy makes complete sense for Google Search. But they're an organization that bought YouTube, and therefore their environmental strategy might need to change a bit to work for YouTube.
I'll just a quick question.
Yeah, sure.
The cellular network, which components of that are consuming all the energy?
Mostly the 3G base stations you see around the place. Yeah, so in general on the network, the further to the edge you get, the more consumption there is, because it runs less efficiently. So stuff in the middle is serving thousands and millions of people, and the kind of peaks and troughs of demands tend to even themselves out. Whereas as one gets to the edge, it's serving less people. So a home Wi-Fi is actually a very inefficient beast. I'll talk about that later on. And so it's serving less people, and therefore it's used effectively less efficiently. So as I say, so Google's policy was appropriate for search, and it's good what they've done. But nonetheless, if we think about it from, we'll see in a moment, an example of what they could do to solve this, which actually is not solve, but mitigate this, which is non-trivial. Okay, so so now we're going to say, what can we do about this? Technology advances to the rescue. That's what we're going to try. So I don't know how many of you, some of you have probably heard of Amory Lovins and the idea of factor 4 and then factor 10 efficiency. Let's make everything more efficient, which is a good thing to do. But if you look at joules per flop, which is a measure of how effectively one turns energy into computation, then the IT is the industry which has made the most energy most improvements from an energy performance of any technology. In fact, a modern laptop is 1,000 times more powerful than what I used to play with when I was at school back in the 1980s. Okay, so it's 1,000 times more powerful. It's 1,000 times more energy efficient, but it uses the same power, so it's a factor 1,000 improvement. So that means the IT industry is a really good case study of someone who's already done this factor 10 stuff, but nonetheless, despite this, the energy used by IT is going up. Okay, so they've not just done factor 10, they've done factor 1,000, and still we're in trouble. Okay, so let's have a look at cloud. That's the individual devices. Let's have a look at cloud. Provision of data centers and network connectivity is also going through similarly impressive energy efficiency gains, but the demand for downloaded data is going up rapidly, so that means because the internet traffic is going up, it means that energy consumption by data centers is also going up and network is going up. So these things, even though very dramatic energy efficiency gains are being made, things are going up. So where is this demand coming from? Brief history of the internet. Brief history of the internet. Back in the 1970s, the internet was primarily a tool for researchers like you, to exchange information with each other. Then in the 1980s, 1990s, basic email and the odd download. In the 1980s, 1990s, then the website started being designed, and it became a way of businesses communicating with customers and trying to sell stuff over time. And then it became a way of businesses communicating with each other to say, okay, now let's try to make our processes more efficient by communicating sales orders, etc. And then after that, it became a means for businesses, particularly entertainment businesses, to fire stuff at you to make you happy and maybe buy more stuff. Okay, and so that's kind of brief history of the internet. And so as a result of that, nowadays the internet is primarily a tool for consumer entertainment. These other things all still happen, but from a data point of view, they are the small fish in the pond. The big fish in the pond from a data point of view is consumer entertainment, making you happy, from a pumping data through the internet point of view. So business traffic is about 20% of the total and expected to roughly stabilize. There might be, radically new ways of doing things which might change this, but broadly that's the pattern at the moment. So media consumption is the main driver of internet growth. So the rebound effect. So we all know about the rebound effect. The IT is beyond the rebound effect. Exactly the same innovations which improve energy efficiency also results in devices getting smaller and devices getting cheaper. Computational power has got cheaper. So because energy efficiency improvements also make things smaller and cheaper, it means people use more of the stuff. More people can afford to use the stuff, which is not a bad thing, just to be clear. And also, we find new ways of using the stuff. We find new ways of innovating to use the stuff. And all these lead to increased demand. And this is what the pattern looks like. So what we can do is determined by the infrastructure capacity. The IT industry says, we've got a new idea about increasing infrastructure capacity, and we think you'll find it useful because you can do what you like now faster. So let's do it. And then people invest in it. States invest in it as well. And this enables the design of new services. So you can do what you were doing faster, but it allows you to do new things over time. Maybe virtual reality in the future, that sort of thing. And that in turn leads to demand. There will be the early adopters, who are often the more wealthy people, will say, I like this, let's do it. I want my Netflix. The kind of wealthy students was probably the original Netflix market. So I want my Netflix. And then it gets driven down in price because of the infrastructure capacity goes up in response to that. And so other people can afford it and becomes more widely adopted. And so we go around this cycle again. The next cycle will be 5G mobile. 5G mobile will be the next cycle of this, which we'll be deploying over the next few years. So this is a kind of cycle, which is a cycle of expansion and results in effectively technology pull. So innovation in user experience. This allows you to do what you were doing equally faster and allows you to do new stuff. So you find ways to make use of more bandwidth, you spread infrastructure around. So we spoke about the home network. One of the trends in the home network is now we want network connectivity in every room. We don't just want it where our computer is. And so home network equipment is becoming more energy demanding because we want it in every room. We want repeaters around the house, etc. So it's not a large amount, but nonetheless, it's there. Multiple devices. We want to upgrade our devices. We want multiple devices. And we want to move from collective to personal experiences. We don't watch TV sets as a family so much now. We each individually watch our YouTube feeds. So, two possible futures. So, demand curve, as the quantity increases, the price goes down. As the price goes down, the quantity increases. And so what we've been seeing at the moment is that it's very elastic. People buy more stuff, buy more digital technology, the use of digital technology services, because prices are going down. So the quantity increases. And it's very elastic. The question is it going to carry on this way? Which means that all efficiency improvements in IT will kind of flow through, or will it tail off? Right, I'm running out of time because I was taking questions in the middle. I thought I'd...
Oh, yes,
yeah.
I suppose we could have a bit more.
Yeah. So, or will it tail off? That's the question. If it genuinely does tail off, then IT efficiency improvements will reduce the emissions of the overall industry in a genuine way. That's the question. So who is responsible? The key point I want to make here is that digital technology is more egalitarian than aviation. In aviation, we're all part of the global 1% in terms of kind of income, if we look at our income. In aviation, it's kind of the global 1 to 2% who uses the aviation service. Whereas for IT, it's a far more egalitarian thing. Those of us with most money use the most, but nonetheless it is accessed by many people throughout the world. So it's a more egalitarian thing. So as a result of this, we can't solve it. So in aviation, if we don't fly, it makes a significant difference potentially. With IT, it needs the whole of the world to a certain extent to change its behaviour. And so that means we need to ask the manufacturers to innovate responsibly with regard to it. So we already have design for environmental digital services. We should have design for, of digital products. We should have it of digital services. What I want to do now is just so to summarise, high bandwidth services, network bandwidth use is the biggest factor affecting impact. And in the home, there are lower energy devices are being replaced by higher energy devices. Are they replacing higher energy devices? Maybe not. But also manufacturing rather than use is also a big factor affecting IT, which I haven't had time to discuss. What I want to do very briefly is talk about beyond the direct impacts of IT. What is the corporate message about this? So indirect of ICT are that basically, can ICT reduce emissions somehow? Enabling effects, can we green through ICT? And there is a report called the Smarter 2020-2030 report, which argues that there are a number of ways we can green by using IT services. And in particular, they argue that by using IT services, if you look at the footprint of IT, it's this bit here, that's how much the direct impact of IT. But look at all these gains, these emissions reductions that are enabled by ICT. And these are things like enabling renewable energy. So I won't go through the details of it, but enabling integrating renewables, telecommuting, video conferencing, managing livestock to be more carbon efficient, etc. All these are ways that IT can be used to help. So that's the argument from the industry. And I think that's not a bad thing to do. It's not bad to explore these. But I'm not convinced by this offset argument here, okay, that our good significantly offsets our bad. So why is that? First of all, it's because IT results in structural rebound. So if we take, there's a friend of mine who was made redundant from Hewlett-Packard at the same time as me. He got a job in Colorado working remotely from Bristol because of IT. He had to fly to spend a week in Colorado every 6 weeks. And that was enabled by remote working. Okay, so there's these structural rebounds. There's different ways of organising society which become possible from IT point of view, which can increase emissions, even though the short-term effects might be reduced. They also enable negative impacts on the environment. We've spoken about how they can enable positive impacts, but IT allows business models like Ryanair. We couldn't have cheap flights without IT systems behind Ryanair. And similarly, it enables tar sands. Tar sands could not be mined without the IT sensors that are in place. And so for that reason, I don't believe that IT companies can legitimately argue that the good they do necessarily offsets their direct emissions. I don't think that's a valid argument. Basically because IT is an accelerator. It moves society faster in whatever direction legislation and society decides to point. So it's not intrinsically good or bad. It moves us, it can move us to a sustainable economy, and it will move us faster in that direction, provided that the legislative incentives are put in place to make that happen. So in other words, only if we as a society choose to make it happen. So what is the appropriate message from IT? I believe that the appropriate message is one that is based on the concept of planetary boundaries, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with. I believe that unlike many industries, the IT industry is able to say that we can meet in a relatively egalitarian way the needs of humanity for their digital services in a way which fits within planetary boundaries. So aviation cannot do that. We cannot, it's very hard to imagine a future in which aviation is offered to 70% of the planet to the level that we use now. In IT, it's an open research question. It might be possible. It might be possible that the efficiency gains, together with appropriate design decisions, can allow us to deliver a level of service that is comparable with what we have now to the global world. And so as a result, a research question that I'm interested in is, can we have digital living within planetary boundaries? And that's what I hope to work on in the future. So thank you very much for your time.